Hello, my name is Margaret Adele, and welcome to another indie book review. I finally am using those ARC sites that are constantly asking me to be a reviewer because I remembered that I can search for monster romance on there. So today I am reviewing His Rock Hard Rhythm by Flora and Josie Kell. This is indeed a monster romance all about a witch who is sent to be a touring manager for this band of orcs in this world. All of the mystical creatures are well known in just parts of society: orcs, elves, witches, shifters, and the like. And so there are specific genres of music catering to each of those, including, yes, orcs. Delightful. Loved the concept. I love the concept of orcs as the main characters. It's a big thing, and you can't really find it a lot. So I was really excited for this one. It also follows Alexis as she is struggling with her own magic. She has this older sister who is like better at her than everything magic-wise, and so she lives in her shadow as she struggles. And Mace, who is just getting over a huge breakup from his last girlfriend, who was a groupie that left him for another lead singer of a different band. So obviously, we've got some personal drama going into it. And right off the bat, I thought this was going to do something with some sort of like mystical connection between the two, because it starts off with Mace, the lead singer of the band, is on stage, and Alexis is in the wings, like staring at him, and they have this like mystical connection, right, like on site. And at first I was like, oh, is this gonna be True Mates? Because I love True Mates. But no, it wasn't. It was basically just supposed to be essentially love at first sight without True Mates, which was very strange to me because they're both magical creatures. You could easily have at least one, if not both of them, come from species that have True Mates. Like, that would make sense to me. But no, it's just love at first sight, like the normal kind. But when they get back to the green room, Mace mistakes Alexis for a groupie. And at first I was like, the synopsis made it sound like a really big deal. It's not. It's actually solved pretty quickly. And also, like, it's supposed to be like, oh, how dare Mace assume that? But it also goes into very depth to explain just how skimpy the dress she was wearing is. Like, boobs about to fall out, well above the knee dress that's like skin tight. And like, yeah, I know, purity culture is bullshit and all of that, but also, if you're going to a job, you generally don't do it with your cleavage hanging out. And the book kind of wants to be like, well, they're rock stars. It's rock stars. The rock star manager has to dress like a groupie, apparently. I didn't get the logic there at all. But that conflict was solved pretty quickly. Still, at first, it seemed like a really cool connection. Although this was also when I thought that it still might be True Mates or like some kind of like mystical connection. But as the things progress during the tour and all of that, they talked. In theory, they spoke to each other. But actually on the page, they were really just having sex. So basically, they start sneaking around together. And Alexis is like, oh, I can't, like, if I get caught, it's going to be a whole big deal and all of that. She also just came from being the touring manager for this tweeny bopper boy band. And so she still has a very different mode of, like, what a tour manager is, because for that band she was basically also parent on top of tour manager. So she's struggling to like switch to this more rock star mentality. And again, I'm not sure if this book is like an actual representation of being a touring manager for a rock band or like a highly romanticized, over the top version of what it would be like. But essentially, the book tells you that they talk, this is one of my biggest pet peeves, is yes, you cannot show every bit of information going back and forth between the characters, but you always need to begin with one serious conversation that shows the romance forming, and then routinely come back to show other serious conversations to show that emotional growth. What this book did, and what is one of my biggest pet peeves, is it did the whole telling you in the narration what they talked about instead of showing you in dialogue. So it's like, they talk about their childhoods. What stories did they tell? And how did the other person feel about it? Like, why am I not getting a play-by-play of them falling in love when this is a romance? But then, like, sex scenes would be prolonged. Orcs have fantastic stamina, apparently, and, like, it would just go on and on and on with these, like, several rounds of sex scenes, but then would just summarize their conversation. So the actual on-page, quote-unquote, screen time, if you want to call it that, was way more sex than any actual, like, making mental connections just by sheer line count. And so I never got to the point where I was like, oh yes, this is a true love match. This is it for them, because they both had that kind of, oh, they're different than my last relationship. This is so much different. And I'm thinking to myself, can you show me that? Can I see the romantic, emotional, spiritual connection? Because all I'm seeing is sex. And I admit that I am a bit spoiled for monster romance and monster erotica, because I have fully dived into the deep end of tentacles and spider aliens. This one barely felt like a monster romance to me at all. The orc protagonist felt very humanish. I mean, granted, he has green skin and tusks, and the narrative outside of the sex scenes tells you how big he is, to the extent that orcs in this world have to have, like, their own, like, orcish items. Like, they have to have, like, orc playing cards and orc drinking glasses, because their hands are just so big that using, like, human items is difficult for them, right? He's that much bigger. Never comes up in the sex scenes. Like, if all of him is that much bigger than a human, some things should be coming up. Or, like, it should be emphasized, his giant, hulking form was towering over her, or something. Like, the point of a monster romance or monster erotica is for the monstrous parts to come up in the sex scenes. The sex scene should not feel like human to human. That defeats the purpose of a monster romance. And again, I admit, I'm very spoiled for this, and I've jumped so far into the deep end that, like, I don't even consider, like, vampire romances to be monster romances at this point. I will allow that the tusks do come in a little bit, but in general, this is probably one of the most beginner monster romances I've ever read, which I don't necessarily consider a bad thing. I think that this can be a genre that's very difficult to get into. So if you're like, I kind of want to get into it, but also, like, this would probably be a pretty easy one, because it's literally just, he's got green skin, he's got tusks, and sometimes they'll talk about how much bigger he is, but it won't really come up in the sex scenes at all. The other thing that is a big thing to note, and this is one of my other pet peeves, and I'm trying to talk about this with as little spoilers as possible, miscommunication trope. Multiple times. And I know this is a whole, like, debate. Miscommunication as a trope is one of those things that you either love or hate. But for my part, the reason that I dislike miscommunication tropes so much is because, while in theory it is possible to do them well, the vast majority of romance authors do not take the time it would take to actually do them well, because the fact of a miscommunication is, yes, it is very realistic that some couples will have these blow-up arguments about a simple miscommunication. The thing is that that's usually a sign of a very weak relationship, that one misunderstanding or just not speaking to each other can lead to this giant word-done fight, and in this book's case, multiple times, shows this is a very weak relationship that is not on strong footing. And then they start talking about how, oh, it's so much different than my last one. Really? Because y'all need to talk more. You're not talking to each other. And there was even one part where I remember there was one sex scene where I was like, there's a situation you need to be talking through right now. Literally, like, and I'm like, okay, you know what? No, they're gonna, it's dramatic. They're gonna have sex. And then, like, afterwards, laying in each other's arms, they're gonna talk about it. Nope. And it's like literally skipping the crucial communication points of a relationship for sex scenes. But it's supposed to be like this big love match, to the extent that, like, Alexis's powers start growing in response to this pure relationship. And I was very frustrated, because it's like, I can see what the author wanted to get across, but she picked the least, or I guess they. I'm confused as to how much one of the authors, Josie Kell, actually contributed to this, because everywhere else I've seen the authors' names, it's just Flora Dare. But I'll say they just in case. they definitely wanted readers to feel that this was a perfect match, but they didn't show enough of the communication. They didn't show what's the dynamic? How are they relying on each other? You know, what ways are they getting through these miscommunications or through these conflicts other than just miscommunication, figuring it out, moving forward? And it was just very frustrating. And it was weird because this book wasn't that short. It was nearly 300 pages, which for a paranormal romance, especially a digital indie copy, that's longish or on the longer side. I've read some that are as low as like 150 pages. But it still never seemed to quite reach there. It told you they were there, didn't show you, didn't really show that mental, emotional connection. I never really believed that their relationship had, you know, evolved past the lustful stage. And again, while it's weird, I love true mates tropes, but I hate non-true mate love at first sight tropes. It might be hypocritical, I don't know. But it was just very sad to see such a promising start kind of peter out at the end. And also, complete side note, they also had like the standard read these other books by these authors at the end of the book, which I've never had in a review copy before. Granted, most of my review copies come directly from the author and are like PDFs meant to only be reviews. This might be a case where the author uploaded like just the standard ebook version to the site and it ended up that way. But I do have feelings. Please don't use my reviewing to advertise to me. Regardless, I gave this book 3 stars. Fantastically great premise and idea. I would like a little bit more fleshed out in the world building, but of course this is a series, so I'm assuming there will be more later. There were some awkward expositional dialogue moments, but nothing too egregious, what I would probably consider standard. And I do love that the orcs, it balanced they're very larger than life and high energy, but not pure barbaric. So that part was pretty good. I just wish that the execution from, you know, the half point onward had been, first of all, much longer, a lot more focused on their communication, and a lot more focused on the mental and emotional aspect of the relationship, and maybe less sex scenes. No, scratch that. Keep the same number of sex scenes, add on to the emotional stuff. Let's get an even longer book. I love me a slow burn. Regardless, I will not be continuing with this series. I only continue with the series if the book is 4 stars or above, which, I mean, I don't have a direct contact to the author this time around because I used the site. In general, I think I would use the site again. If you're interested, you can check out Book Sirens. I'll have that URL down in the description below. It is a little bit disconcerting that you have a time limit in 90 days, regardless of when the book was published. You have to review it in 90 days or DNF it in 90 days. So I will probably only be using it when there's like a book that I'm like 100% interested in and can start reading immediately, because I will forget. I will just completely forget about that deadline if I don't do that. But if you're interested in becoming a reviewer, you can check that out. If you're an indie author and you're interested in a review like this one, you can send me an email. I'll have all of my information down in the description below. Please be sure to give my review policy a read through. It answers a lot of questions and saves us a lot of time. And with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.